With such an impressive discography, and given the fact that it's one of my favorite bands of all time, it's kinda silly for me to make a video on the one Beatles album no one really likes. Because even though 1969's Yellow Submarine is often rightfully placed at the bottom of the band's discography, I believe that once you understand the reason the album is what it is, you'll be able to appreciate it a lot more. Or not.
Maybe we should call a road service.
Can't no road.
And we're not subscribers.
Subscribers. Ooh.
It's been a while since I've done an old-fashioned review on this channel, but I'm really excited for this one because I feel like a lot of fans don't really know what this album is, don't know what this album represents for the band. When you look at the track list, when you look at the fact that half of the songs in this album were not even made by the Beatles, it's easy to see this album as the worst release by the band. And let me tell you, it is. It is by far the worst album the band ever released. But I feel like there's too many people taking this album way too seriously, so if you're a fan and you've never heard this album, or if you have and don't like it at all, then allow me to give you some context, allow me to explain you what this album actually is, and maybe you'll like it a little more. The first thing one should do before listening to this album is decide what the album actually is. Is it an EP? Is it a soundtrack? Is it a compilation? Or is it an actual studio release by the band? Well, technically, it's all of them. It's honestly really complicated. This album is basically a contractual obligation the Beatles had to fulfill, but they didn't want to make this album or the film. Actually, the reason why this is an animated film and not an actual movie with actors like A Hard Day's Night and Help is because the Beatles didn't want to participate in it, and that obviously translates to the soundtrack of the album, because there's a few different type of songs in this album. You have unreleased songs that belong to the Sgt. Pepper sessions probably, Only a Northern Song and It's All Too Much. You have songs that were previously released as a single like All You Need Is Love and Yellow Submarine, and then you have the songs that were actually made for the film, like All Together Now and Hey Bulldog. So that means that out of the 6 songs that the Beatles provided for this record, only 2 of them were actually made with the movie in mind. That tells you the amount of effort the Beatles put into this album. And by the way, it's not like they sat down and thought of making a song for the film. Hey Bulldog, for example, John came up with the melody and the piano chords while making a promotional video for Lady Madonna. And altogether now, according to McCartney, is nothing more than a throwaway song that he used in jam sessions to get his vocals in check. So even the songs that were provided for the film were not actually made with the film in mind. And as a fan, I think it's really important for you to know this before you jump into the album, because part of the reason everyone hates Yellow Submarine is because it ruins the continuity of the band's discography. You have Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, The White Album, and Abbey Road. Oh no, you have Yellow Submarine. In between 2 of the greatest albums of all time, you have this album, you know. Without this album, you'd have probably the best run of albums in the history of music, but unfortunately, Yellow Submarine is there. So I personally believe, and you can say that I'm cheating if you want, that this does not count as a proper studio release by the band. So in my own canon of the band's discography, after The White Album, you have Abbey Road. So before I move on to reviewing the actual music of the album, you need to make that decision for yourself. Do you see this as an actual studio release by the band, or simply a compilation that worked as a soundtrack for the film?
Hey, he looks wrong. He doesn't look at all well. In fact, he's horrible.
He's so ugly.
Alright, so getting into the actual music, to open up the album, we have the title track, The Wonderful Yellow Submarine, sung by the one and only Ringo Starr. This song was originally recorded in May of 1966 and was released as a double A-side single with Eleanor Rigby. It was also included on the wonderful timeless classic Revolver, and is actually one of my favorite tunes in that album. The heavy guitar playing, the playfulness of Ringo Starr's vocals, and the pirate-like sounds towards the end of the song that add this layer of playfulness and role-playing that make the song really enjoyable for me. However, even though I really like the song, and it's one of the most recognizable songs by the band, actually when it was released, it went #1 in multiple parts of the world, I don't think it's a good tone setter for this album. You know, a lot of the songs in this one are going to be quite psychedelic and heavy and fast-paced, weird, you know, so I don't think Yellow Submarine kind of like hints towards that experimentation you'll find later on the album. In Revolver, it works a little better because it's not the intro song of the album. It's kind of halfway through the album, so by the time you get to Yellow Submarine, you've been through quite a lot of experimentation already, so it sounds more natural. In this one, right after Yellow Submarine, you have It's Only a Northern Song. A song that has to be one of the most experimental, but also one of the weakest compositions that George Harrison ever did with the Beatles, because the whole song feels like George was sabotaging himself. You know, the melody is boring, the instrumentation is nuts, and I don't mean that in a good way. You know, it's messy messy as hell with a bunch of trumpet sounds in the background. The tempo of the song is really slow, even though the instrumentation is going 1,000 miles per hour. And then you have the lyrics, which I mean, I get it. He was making fun of the fact that shareholders were making more money out of his music than him, which is fucked up, but you didn't really do a good job depicting the whole thing. The song was recorded in February of 1967, I believe, and was supposed to be included on the Sgt. Pepper album, but was rejected for obvious reasons. This is not a good song. Following that, we have Paul McCartney's All Together Now, recorded in May of 1967. This is one of the 2 songs that were written exclusively for the film, and honestly, I think it works really well as a part of the soundtrack, even though it's a really basic and playful tune. I think that considering the fact that Yellow Submarine is an animated film for kids, it matches that energy quite well. One of the main problems that many of the songs in this album have is that they don't really work as a part of the soundtrack. Even though Hard Day's Night and Help and Magical Mystery Tour are studio albums, actual musical statements by the band, I believe that if you were to analyze those albums as nothing more than a soundtrack, they would still do a pretty good job. Instead, in the Yellow Submarine film, it feels like just because the film is really colorful, they believe that any psychedelic song would do, and that's not the case at all. Instead, All Together Now in songs like Yellow Submarine, the playful and childlike nature of the songwriting and the performance really do match the energy of the film. That's the reason why, even though it's a really basic song, it's definitely not the best composition in the album or the best composition of McCartney with the band around this time. I personally believe that it's a really good and adorable addition to the track list. Now, I know I've been kind of harsh with this album so far, but that's about to change because we have one of the greatest compositions by John Lennon with the Beatles, Hey Bulldog. Once again, as part of the soundtrack, this song is not exactly the greatest. It doesn't match the energy of the film at all. Actually, I believe that in the American version, you can't even hear the song being played in the actual film. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've only seen it a couple times, and believe me, I didn't really have a good time. But sometimes when a song is so good, you overlook a few things, and I'm willing to overlook that little flaw because Hey Bulldog is amazing. The opening piano riff is amazing, John Lennon's aggressive but somehow elegant vocals, Paul McCartney's backing vocals as well, adding this layer of intensity and euphoria to the song. The instrumentation is quite simple, there's nothing too crazy going on, but I think that the intense piano playing and the guitar make this song sound very psychedelic and heavy, and I love it. I love the sound of this song, and it's definitely the highlight of this album. John Lennon, you're a genius. It's a bit of a shame because I think this song would have been perfect for the White Album, but because they needed a new song for the film, they had to use this one, so yeah. Moving on, we have George Harrison once again trying to blow our minds away, and this time, in my opinion, he succeeded because It's All Too Much is one of my favorite songs in the album, and in my opinion, his best psychedelic composition. The heaviness and the distortion of the guitar and the feedback, along with George Harrison's beautiful falsetto-ish vocals, create this balance between vocals and instrumentation that you won't find anywhere else in the band's discography. And though the song once again doesn't really work all that well as part of the soundtrack for the film, I have to say the sequence in which this song is played is one of the most beautiful and colorful moments of the entire thing. I'm going to try and find the clip on YouTube so you guys can see it.
Hola, that's all.
What's the matter, fellas? Blue meanies?
Wonderful, beautiful, amazing. I do believe that the song could have been a little less repetitive. In my opinion, the repetition, it's all too much. All I'm saying is that with a little more improv, the song could have been a lot better. But as it is, it's still one of the greatest guitar moments in George Harrison's catalog with the Beatles, and it's one of the most interesting and mind-bending psychedelic songs the band has to offer. And then you have the last song from the Beatles in this album, All You Need Is Love, also included on the Magical Mystery Tour album. I don't really have to say that much about this one. I mean, everyone knows this song. It was broadcasted to 400 million people, I believe, on the June 25th of 1967 in the TV satellite program Our World. The impact and cultural relevance of this song has been a topic of conversation for over 50 years now, so I don't really think there's that much to say about it. In my opinion, it's one of John Lennon's best compositions with the Beatles and an early example of his tendency to get political with his music, so for that reason, I think it's really important, although I personally believe that this song doesn't really have a place in an album like Yellow Submarine. I understand why they put it in the album. It's psychedelic, it's colorful, it matches the energy of the album, so yeah, it's still a bit of an overkill though. After this, you have side 2 of the album with the actual score for the film, the orchestral compositions made by George Martin. I don't really want to get into it though because they're really repetitive. In my opinion, the only ones that are kind of enjoyable are Pepperland and Sea of Time. They're not bad at all if you're cooking, studying, or doing laundry and this is playing in the background. It's actually kind of nice, but there's nothing really that interesting for me to talk about in the second half of this album. Alrighty, so first of all, I'm sorry for the wardrobe change. I was recording the last part of this video when I noticed the microphone wasn't recording. So yeah, Blue Yeti microphone, go ahead and get yours. But to wrap it up, I want to go back to the question I asked in the beginning of the video. What is this album for you? Is it a soundtrack? Well, if that's the case, let me tell you this is a terrible album. There's multiple songs in here, like Hey Bulldog, like It's All Too Much, like All You Need Is Love, that even though they're psychedelic and colorful, don't really match the energy, the childish, playful, and goofy energy of the film. So therefore, it doesn't really work that well as a soundtrack. Do you see this album as an actual studio release by the Beatles? Well, let me tell you, that's even worse. You only have 2 songs made for this album. The rest are either from the Sgt. Pepper sessions or previously released singles like A Yellow Submarine and All You Need Is Love. Basically, this album is nothing more than a compilation. The songs have no continuity. They weren't made for this album. The recording sessions go from 1966, 1967 to 1968, and only half of the songs in the album were actually made by the Beatles, which is why at the very beginning of the video I said that I don't believe this to be a part of the canon discography of the Beatles. In my opinion, when it comes to studio albums, after the White Album, you have Abbey Road. No Yellow Submarine in between. So when we talk about this album, we don't really say it's bad because we don't like it. It has some really good songs in it. We say it's bad because it's not really an album.
Look at John, will ya?
What's the matter, John, love? Blue meanies?
Newer and bluer meanies have been sighted within the vicinity of this theatre. There's only one way to go out. How's that? Singing! 1, 2, 3, 4!
And that is going to be it for today's video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, an album, or an artist, leave it down below as well and I'll make sure to read it and fulfill your request as soon as I can. Once again, I hope that you enjoyed it and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.